let's go back to like February and early March of this year and kind of tell us what your coverage plans look like at that time and walk us through how things shifted in mid-March when everything essentially shut down, and a little bit about what your thought process was, how your beat and approach changed to what you were covering and what you're covering now and what that looks like for all of you. Alice, why don't we start with you since you ended the last question?
Sure. Oh gosh, remembering those days, how could we ever forget? So my husband owns a live events business here in Los Angeles. And on Thursday, I think it was that Thursday, March 12th, he's basically like, okay, we're going to have to lay off 40% of the staff tomorrow, everything, and I didn't realize how abruptly the world was changing. That was like on a Thursday. And by Sunday, the CDC had said no events, no gatherings over or whatever. And so within days, I realized that what he had done on Thursday was totally inevitable. And it was, events and travel maybe were first, but everything else, like the dominoes were falling. So I assumed that as somebody who writes about live events and travel, by Monday, I would be like, done working. Everything would dry up immediately. In fact, was not the case at all. And February, March, and April were my biggest months ever in terms of revenue and in terms of volume. So naturally the pivot, right? So whereas I had done a lot of, for Business Insider, for instance, a lot of hotel reviews and like field reporting from travel experiences. And I was clearly not doing that, but we started kind of experimenting with, the best travel movies to watch and even hotel roundups that were just desk reported. The idea being that when people got back to travel, sort of this content would be there for them, almost like an available, updated archive. And then it shifted more to like almost kind of hard news, whereas it had been lifestyle before. So it was like hard news, travel safety reporting. So I was like talking to infectious disease doctors. In fact, one so frequently that we're like basically friends. We're like I'm on speed dial. And as a lifestyle and travel writer, I feel like this is when the story became coronavirus. And again, as Katie was saying, sort of travel, travel and relationships, travel and, that intersects with everything. Now I write about coronavirus as it intersects with everything. And so that became an interesting, more of a hard news pivot for a lifestyle person. I noticed that, for instance, Good Housekeeping, I've always done evergreen content and it did not change. And it was almost strange to write it because it was like, let's say I write about a lot of like sort of holiday and family things pegged to holidays and so forth. And it was like, for, ideas for your 4th of July gathering with SEO in mind, but it was like, but don't gather. But, the idea was, again, sort of an archive that is available and also that has like long lead SEO value, long tail. And then so certainly like work I think picked up in part because the coronavirus story was so new, and up until that point there was nobody had covered any stories. It was like everything needed to be covered, every single facet, every single nuance of Zoom, of social adaptation, of relationships changing, of wardrobe changing, that all had to be covered because none of it existed yet. And so I think we were all probably like doing a piece of that, and then at a certain point it was covered, like every nuance had been covered. So, and for me, again, this is my first full year as a full-time freelance writer. So I'm not very like aware of what the natural seasonal ebbs and flows would be yet, but this summer did slow down. And I thought, I found that a little bit concerning, or I don't know, I wondered where that was going. And now it's gotten quite busy again. I'm like, the workload is enormous and it's a combination of all kinds of stuff, coronavirus and not. So I'm very heartened by that.
Yeah. That's great. Awesome. Well, Catherine, what about you? Or Katie, sorry. Katie, what about you?
I did that to myself. So I'm a delusional optimist. So at the beginning, I mean, I got depressed about it late, but in March, I was in Curacao learning, thank God, I was doing a story on learning how to scuba dive, and then it sort of synced right up because I was like, scuba diving is the original social distancing. Like the best way to protect other people is to protect yourself and like all this stuff. So that was one easy tie-in, but like, yeah, I had told myself that I was going to slow down about a bit with travel. But it's really hard for me if it's a place I want to go to and I want to go everywhere I haven't been. And like, you know what I mean? And it's a story I'm passionate about. It'd be really hard to sort of say no. And so I was booked solid until June, the end of June. And then I had trips planned through October. And then one of them, I'm still depressed. I was supposed to cover the Olympic relay in Japan. That's one thing I'm never going to get over because I don't know when anything like that's ever going to happen. But then everything else, it was sort of like, I'm a delusional optimist. I was like, okay, this is going to be funny. You know, I'm going to be with my parents and my brothers, you know, and just like write a ton. And what I found was that, yes, like as Alice mentioned at the beginning, there was a lot of coverage about like COVID travel. And I think that it's important, like, because the travel industry, some people can dismiss it as like a 1% luxury or something that's not essential, but like it is essential for like the GDP and the economies of so many different places. And I think it's also essential for people as human beings to have some empathy and to like be aware of like people outside of their own little bubble. So I'll defend that to death. So I'm here for the push that was there around virtual travel, and some of it I was involved with, but I found there was burnout. And I think because there's so little information around COVID and that so much of it right now, particularly with travel, it's delicate, is like people's personal discretion. And like, as we've seen, it's the one time as like a travel writer that I don't really trust my audience. You know what I mean? Like particularly I cover the Caribbean and I'm not traveling until like Christmas, and then I'm going to try because that's like my beat for Trip Savvy. And it's really hard to write about a place you've never been to. And I need to do that. But it's like, finding the balance between saying, like, I find it harder to do actionable travel stories, so I haven't really been doing them as much. But you know what I mean? But if there is one that's like, this place is reopened and here are the precautions, but you know, driving through South Dakota, I was like, these people, hopefully they never read because they never wear masks, whatever. This is going to be a political tangent, which doesn't need to be. So how did it shift? What have I discovered? I write for like Trip Savvy about 7 times a month, and I was doing Forbes to like 5 times a month. And that was a pace that was really heavy, but it was almost easier when I was traveling. And then suddenly when I wasn't traveling, like now I'm trying to position to writing for sort of outlets and publications that I'd always sort of wanted to, and I met the editors and they're like, oh, write this story about this place. That was cool. And I didn't really have the bandwidth to do so. So now I'm really reaching out to like other travel endemic publications, but then like, you know, like, well, like a Departures or Conde Nast Traveler, you know, and trying to get more money and also get an editor for the story. Like I find with Forbes, that can be a little bit frustrating. So I'm trying to sort of shift that, because also I was lucky that, I mean, for me, my biggest anxiety after a trip, always, I feel like I have more anxiety, although I can't imagine hosting someone. And I've heard crazy stories of like journalists ghosting after trips and stuff. I'm like the opposite. I'm like all over your DMs. Like I need that coverage out immediately. Cause like, I'm like, oh my, and then I feel like this like deep, like the people I met, you know what I mean? Like whenever I write a story, I'm like, okay, like I feel obligation. And I've been lucky that I had most of my stories, pretty much all of them had been covered from the trips that I've taken, or else I think that could be, although I mean, pretty much all of them have been, but also no published. Like when I am publishing now more evergreen stories, I'm getting really warm thank yous because people are like, oh, during a pandemic. But for me, like I've never been that interested in reading the 10 best bars in Dublin. Like what made me want to be a travel writer and this type of stories I like to write are like, you know, are going to be like, I just wrote a story on like hiking to the highest lodges in the world in Peru. Do you know what I mean? And like someone could read that and like, it's highly unlikely that they're going to be like, okay, you know, I'm going to do that next weekend. I feel like the idea with travel is that it seeds ideas. Like this is something I could have taken care of, I guess, pre-plague, but I've wanted to go to Tasmania now for 15 years from a story that I read on a flight once, you know, and I found that there's more reader engagement with longer stories because people are on their screens so often. And I feel like in all of this, like I felt like it was premature when the New York Times canceled their travel section because it's sort of forgetting what like travel is, which is also like a lifestyle, international world affairs situation. It's not just travel here, particularly with this type of stories New York Times was writing. You know what I mean? It was like I don't know. I kind of wish I was like a divorcee with like a traumatic experience going through Montana, reading some of them. But you know, it's like, they have the 48 hours thing, but that's not all the travel is. So what I'm doing now moving forward is, you know, I'm based in Jackson Hole, which I wasn't. My family has a cabin out here and they're idiots. The rest of them went home and I'm like, I'm going to stay here. And they thought I was going to get eaten by a bear, but I'm thriving. And I'm really, you know, the American West is something I grew up coming out here all the time, like Wyoming, Montana. I like know this part of the country really well. And I really hadn't focused and done really any domestic stories at all because I didn't want to, because there's so many places I wanted to go to. I didn't want to go to a place I hadn't been and it's more exciting, right, et cetera. So I feel like this is an opportunity now where I'm looking into like establishing myself for various publications. And I like, if you want any like, you know what I mean? I've been road tripping all around out here. I know a lot. So I'm trying to focus on those type of stories. And then I think sort of the American West, hidden gems, like Reno, Nevada has like a great art scene that I've been wanting to write about for a while. So stuff like that matters. And then I'm going to continue to like pitch and write about like these glass castles in Sweden, you know what I mean? And like this, like, I don't know, I just interviewed, but my last story I wrote was about interviewing this guy, Ang, who's like, essentially his family were the ones, like the first Sherpas to come over to Nepal from Tibet. And they have this insane house. So like focusing on stuff like that, because I mean, those are interesting and I view those as more